Hey everybody, welcome to InPsightRadio. I am your host, Danielle Egnew, and you are a fly on the wall to everywhere. Happy day, everybody. Oh, I'm excited about this podcast. So I'm actually cutting this podcast in the line because I have had a download that I feel is really important to share with everybody, and I think it's just really interesting. Sadly, we have had another shooting, come on, America, that, of course, took place in Boulder, Colorado. This, happened very recently. And one of the things that was brought to my attention was this angel who walks with the world loves to show me energy points all over the globe, actually. And we think of these as ley lines or vortexes or vortices or whatever. So I got to talking with this angel, who's the angel who walks with the world is so not super chatty, yet when it has something to say, it's like, look, this is pertinent, blah. And so they kind of do most of the talking. So when I say chat, I mean mostly listening, by the way. Anyway, I got to mostly listening to this angel that came and let me know that there are some really interesting energy shifts happening right now. And not just in the United States. I mean, they're happening all over the world. Yet because of the way that the United States is laid out geographically, geothermally, geomagnetically, we see a lot of wild things happen here, really because we've got a lot of ley lines and energetic centers that light up like a Christmas tree on a grid. And when you have those ley lines and those energetic centers transmitting energies, what we've got is a vein system that runs all over the planet that conducts energy that is put into the planet, not only by the planet, yet by our tides, by humans. Again, we have almost 8 billion of us, all barfing out really interesting electromagnetic signals into the ethers. We do that through our brain, our heart, all of our electromagnetic systems in the body. Again, a human body is a walking bag of salt water, which is a huge electromagnetic superconductor. So we are constantly transmitting. There are so many of us on the earth. Ley lines pick up those transmissions and siphon them all over the world. And they also move earth energies and cosmic energies. There are some vortexes on this planet that are pulling in vortex energy and galactic energy, universe energy from other parts unknown and barfing them out into our Earth. And that affects our space-time fabric, like, the Bermuda Triangle. When you have that much electromagnetic energy partially generated by the Earth itself, because let's remember the Earth is a giant electromagnet, and then also we've got all of this energy coming in from another, say, dimension or universe. We've got all of that, if you want to call it extrasensory EMF, flooding in electromagnetic frequency, flooding in. What we've got is a planet full of energy, really magnets and magnification. And I just spent the first 3 minutes as as a refresher course on 3 years worth of podcasts here. Yet the reason I'm laying this out here is because as I was laying in bed last night, I received this massive message about the energy that's pumping through a ley line that is right by, if not right on top of, Columbine and Littleton, Colorado, and Boulder, Colorado. And it cuts all the way up the state. And it goes all the way up into Montana and ends up really at the Montana vortices. And if you don't know what the Montana vortices are, it is a fascinating area up in the high northwest super corner of Montana where there are these massive dolmens. And what's a dolmen, you might ask? Well, we've seen dolmens in pictures of Stonehenge. Those great big giant blocks of stone. There's one on the left, one on the right, then a huge capstone. And obviously they've been carved out of something and placed there on purpose. Well, there's a whole system of those up in northeastern Montana. And no, it's not a bunch of stones that were dropped by a glacier gang. I mean, not unless glaciers have gotten really good at carving equidistant amounts of granite and placing them strategically in circles and in lines. So we've got these Montana vortices up in the northwest corner of our state. Now, why am I bringing up ley lines and vortices and vortexes? And I could go on and on about each individual area for an entire podcast. Personally, I think that would put most of you to sleep because probably most of you are not as much of a science nerd as I am. So I'm trying to give you the large brushstrokes here because this is really important, what this angel imparted to me in terms of human beings, earth energies acting out, and how we can account for these things, okay? Now, I'm going to back up a little bit. Obviously, people who get guns and blow people away with them have a lot of emotional issues going on anyway, okay? So it's very important during this podcast to factor in that I'm not saying there is any one big thing that causes somebody to go wacko and shoot up a grocery store or kill dozens of kids in a school. I'm not pinning that on vortexes or earth energies or ley lines. I just happen to find it really interesting that the angel who walked with the world came and tapped me on the forehead and said, "Hey, sister." And I'm paraphrasing because they don't talk like this. But, "Hey, sister, guess what? Isn't it weird that in Littleton, Colorado and in Boulder, there were these humongous shootings? Isn't that strange? Like, what's the story? What's going on? Colorado's a weed state. Everybody should be eating pizza and hugging a tree. What's going on?" So I got to looking at it, and they directed me to some ley line maps. Now, I'm going to put a disclaimer out here because it's very important. There is a lot of garbage on the internet, gang. I mean, just whatever. You know, the internet is a free press, like really a newspaper that anyone can put any article in. And so we do have some kind of creative, shall we say, representations of ley lines on the internet. The most reliable ones that I've seen work in these grid and star patterns. And there are connections energetically between energy points, like the Grand Canyon and Bighorn Canyon and the Montana vortices, Bighorn Canyon's in Montana. There are energy points that connect those. Yet there's some pretty hokey, schmokey, weird, I don't know, ley line maps online. You know, there are some very odd ones. So without getting into why they're odd, just be mindful, okay, when you look this stuff up, take it with a little bit of a grain of salt and do use your own gut. What I would tell you if you are observing ley line maps online is to take a look at any ley lines that actually do connect power centers on the earth, because that's actually a thing. And our off-world cultures have been using those ley lines or those energetic superhighways for millennia to navigate and land their craft and do all kinds of things, mine things. I mean, they've been using that forever. So just keep in mind there are some pretty hokey ley line charts out there. That being said, and I'll save you the whole details of how I got to this particular chart. However, I picked a couple of charts that resonated not only with what I knew and have felt in earth energies, yet also made sense mathematically and geomagnetically. And some of the things that I found is that there's a very large global ley line that cuts right to the left of Denver and is in essence going right up between Littleton, Colorado and Boulder, Colorado. And it just keeps traveling upward. And again, it goes up and it ends up intersecting the Montana vortices. Well, why is this important? Why am I talking about this? Am I saying if you live on a ley line, you're going to go crazy and shoot up a grocery store? No. However, I do think it's amazing that all of this stuff is happening in Colorado. So not only do we have Littleton and we've got Boulder really right up this ley line. And keep in mind, a ley line doesn't always have to cut right through a city town center to have its effects felt. It's like a fault line. Okay, I want you to think of a ley line like a fault line in the plates of the earth. And I can live 100 miles, 50 miles, 20 miles from a fault line. Yet if that fault line really shakes, I'm going to feel an earthquake. Okay, so it's not like you have to be standing right on the crack in the sidewalk to break your mother's back here. I mean, you can be off to the side and you're still going to get that energy. Well, not only was I directed to the fact that there are some really interesting ley lines here that are affecting our Colorado folk. Yet another issue that literally my attention was drawn to was the fact that not only do we have ley lines that are pumping world energies through an area, and again, remember, ley lines pump the energy of consciousness. Okay? Consciousness is a real thing, gang. It's not a theory, it's a thing. It's a measurable in electromagnetic impulses in brain waves. Consciousness is a measurable metric that is placed into the atmosphere, just like the signal coming off of your cell phone, okay? Just like that millimeter radiation that's out there. Your brain is a transmitter. So I really want to strike this and drive this home because it's important to note that your brain is a transmitter. So when I'm saying that ley lines are carrying a consciousness through the earth, this is not some woo-woo, metaphysically, oh, sit down and suck on a crystal, snort the sage in the right nostril and blow it out the left. Think of a very lovely god or goddess that takes you to a place there is no pain and endless cake. I'm not talking about that, all right? I'm talking about actual science and physics. So ley lines convey that particular energy that is placed out into the ethers. They are like an electrical wire in your alley that brings your house power. You know how the alleys have these ugly wires hanging in them often, unless it's a community that's brought them underground. But in older communities, the wires are above ground. And you've got a transformer out in the ugly wires in your alley, right? I mean, we've got this at our place. Our place was built in 1929. So we live in an older neighborhood. And you've got this wire that goes from the main transmitter or the transformer to the house. So the earth is a big generator of electricity. And ley lines are the wires that run from the main generators off to the different areas of the earth because the earth requires energy to run it. You know, plants require electromagnetic energy in the soil to grow. Water molecules, hydrogen molecules require energy in order to plump them up or make them tiny. Actually, to make them small, you want them small to absorb them better if you're drinking water. Yet all of this electrolyzed life, the earth is dependent upon an electromagnetic system for all of its life. It's not just water. We need an active electromagnetic system. And just because you have gravity doesn't always mean that you have an active electromagnetic system. That also has to do with atmosphere and tides and all kinds of stuff. I mean, we can look at the moon. The moon has a small amount of gravity just because of its proximity to the earth and the sun and all these things. Yet it does not have an active electromagnetic system. It has a mild one. It's barely there. Yet that's one of the reasons that it doesn't maintain an atmosphere. That's one of the reasons that there's life that we would recognize not on the moon. Now, there's a lot of life on the moon, and there's a lot of life on the dark side of the moon, and we'll talk about that on another podcast. That's an off-worlder issue. Yet, the life that we would recognize is not there. So, it's very interesting when we look at how dependent the planet is on energy. Everything that lives on the earth, from microbes to dolphins to humans to trees to grass to rocks, that conduct electromagnetic energy through their iron and crystalline content, their limestone content. Everything on this planet has got to conduct electricity to participate and be alive. And I know people are probably laughing, thinking, dude, rocks are not alive. Actually, they are. Rocks have all kinds of consciousness, and they perform their own living function. Now, they may not breathe and poo and do all the things that we do. They may not eat a corn dog and root their favorite baseball team on, yet they are alive in their own way. Have you ever wondered why it feels so dang good to sit on a big slab of granite and just sit there? You are exchanging energy with that being or with that rock thing. I mean, you literally are. That's an actual thing. So when we talk about being alive on the planet, ley lines are the plug-in to the entire planet to keep the whole thing plugged in with electricity and running, okay? They are the wires in the alley. So we look at Littleton. We look at where the Columbine shooting happened. We look at Boulder, Colorado. We look at these areas where there is a consistent upheaval in electromagnetic energy in people's brains. And man, dang it, if there is not ley lines that run right up both of those, right off of both of those cities. So that's an important note, okay? The other thing is that both of these particular cities, again, we're talking Littleton, where Columbine happened, and Boulder, are pretty much right up against the mountains there, okay? They got some mountains, big old Rockies just hanging out over there. And one of the things that is so interesting about that is that not only do they have mountains, which create a barrier as well as a transmitter of electromagnetic energy, or all energies, really, they also act as a splash bay. Like, think about baffles that are put into a harbor to keep the tide out. And those big baffles, those big concrete baffles, create a very calm harbor inside of the baffles. So mountains can act like that as well. They can interrupt the flow or the wave of energy because they're big. I mean, they're ginormous, and they're also full of their own vortices and energy points. So think about them for our discussion as a big bay baffle that's in the water. Why is that important? Well, you've got Boulder right up against those, and Littleton is just to the right of those. And not too far away in Fort Collins, Colorado, we have a VLF array, a very low frequency array that runs at 60 hertz. Now, what the hell am I talking about? Very low frequency arrays, VLF arrays, are used by the military, and they are used to communicate through the earth. They use the earth like a giant subwoofer, basically, and they shoot very low frequencies through the earth so that those frequencies can get to the ocean and communicate with submarines. They use the earth as a refractive device. Like, think of Beethoven. You know, when Beethoven was losing his hearing, and all of us know Ludwig van Beethoven, the great composer. As he was losing his hearing, it was devastating for him, right? Yet he was still contracted to produce many forms of music. And it was his livelihood. And Beethoven had like a ginormous amount of children. It was something like 11 or 13. I'm not kidding. He had a ton of kids, his poor wife. And he taught all of his children composing. And he taught them to read in certain keys. And he taught them that if you're going to be a string instrument, you're in a different key than a woodwind instrument. I mean, it's very complicated. Music is a weird math thing. And he would literally sit his kids at a table, oldest to youngest, and he would tell his children, okay, this is in the key of this. This is what we're doing. We need a third interval at this, ninth interval at this. Go. And he would place the first note. He would write the top note of his scores, and then he'd send it down the table for his kids to fill in. And there might be a kid who specialized in naturals or thirds, and then it goes to the next kid to fill the next note in down. And then the next kid, you know, he's dealing with the woodwinds, and the next kid is, I mean, literally he had an assembly line. How cool is that, right? To help him score music, because it would take forever otherwise. But anyway, that was a side note. Now you can go on Jeopardy and win $1 million. So Beethoven, right? He was losing his hearing, and he still had music that he had to produce for people. So in order to do this, because his eardrums were no longer working the way they were supposed to, he needed to feel the vibration somehow in his head. So he would put a whalebone, when whalebones are really, really porous, he would put a whalebone in his teeth. And the whalebone would pick up vibrations, shoot it through his teeth, feed up in his ear canals from the inside up those eustachian tubes, and vibrate the inner ear in a way that was different from the outer ear, so that at least he could hear the vibration in a very muffled version of what he was trying to create musically, okay? Can you imagine that? So here he is trying to hear through a whalebone, through the vibrations of a whalebone. Now, I want you to think about the Earth like the whalebone when we're talking VLF arrays, very low frequency arrays. There are also ELF arrays, which are extremely low frequency transmitters. But for this purpose, in Fort Collins, Colorado, we're talking about a VLF array. And again, they are used to send signals through the Earth at this very long wavelength through the Earth to get to the ocean to communicate with submarines. And VLF, very long frequency waves, travel through salt water. Salt water is super dense, right? So you can't exactly just put, a speaker down there and hope it travels. It has to be a very low wave. That's why whale calls can be heard for thousands of miles. They're calling in a very low frequency bandwidth, and that's why their calls are successful under salt water. They wouldn't do so well out in the air. They really wouldn't, because the air, it's harder to contain those very low frequencies. You'd have to have a certain special set of ears to hear it. Yet, when you're dealing with dense matter such as the earth, rocks, water, very low frequencies travel well. Okay? So, going back to the shootings and ley lines and this VLF array that is up in Fort Collins, Colorado. Why am I bringing that up? Well, there's been a lot of very interesting research on very low frequencies and how they affect the brain. And the human brain is really maximized at 7.83 hertz, which is the Schumann resonance. And we oftentimes see articles online talking about the Schumann resonance and how the Schumann resonance moves with the frequency of the earth and with consciousness. That's actually not the Schumann resonance. That is another measurable frequency of consciousness. The Schumann resonance is constant. It's pretty dang constant. And it comes from the center of the earth. And it's that 7.83 hertz that's a fast pulse. It's a real fast pulse. And so that's not going to change. There are going to be variances in the energy flow or the ley line flow of the earth. People tend to call this variance in energies that is mappable on the earth the Schumann resonance, and I mean, just don't call it late for dinner, right? Whatever. However, the actual Schumann resonance is a constant. So when we're dealing with fluctuations in the Schumann resonance, the earth transmits at 7.83 hertz, roughly, between 8.2 and 8.3. And that is a maximized place for brain waves to also be produced. Because you got to remember, our brain is an electromagnetic instrument, right? And it's kind of like a radar that's constantly searching, or a phone that's constantly sweeping for a tower. And it's constantly sweeping and looking for another electromagnetic signal to clock onto. And we call this clocking on, or this locking on to a particular signal, we call it brain entrainment. And you see a lot of, stuff about brain entrainment on the internet. And again, I find this really interesting because brain entrainment is kind of like the new metaphysical thing. It's been out for a couple years, and we talk about binaural beats. You've probably heard of those, and how they entrain your brain to jump circuitry to get rid of past behaviors in order to enter into new behaviors by triggering a brainwave response that is more calm or whatnot. Or maybe you need to be more focused, so you need to be in the gamma section and more focused. Maybe you need to be more relaxed, so you entrain the brain to get to a brainwave level that's a theta wave projection, which makes us more relaxed. But brain entrainment, people seem to look at it as some brand new mystical science, which it's not. Brain entrainment is just a thing. It's just how our brains work. And the science behind binaural beats is that in your left ear, you play something, say, at 400 hertz. And in the right ear, you play something at 410 hertz. So you've got You're just off of the same exact frequency in both ears. So one hemisphere of your brain is processing a pulse. A hertz is a pulse. We think of it as sound, but sound is a pulse, right? So your one side of your brain is processing a pulse that's at a particular speed, and the other side of your brain is processing another pulse at a particular speed. Now, what this does is create what's called a harmonic. And those of us that are music producers use harmonics all the time in mixing. It creates this shimmery, beautiful thing. It's a third resonance that's really a refraction or almost an illusion, although it's real, of two very closely related wave signatures. So why is that important about a VLF array that's way up in Fort Collins, Colorado? Well, I'll get there in a second. So you've got your brain that is hearing these two slightly off vibrations, and your brain creates its own harmonic. And the harmonic is set to create a space where your brain listens to the harmonic and comes out of the brainwave it might be in and attaches itself to the new entrainment or new frequency. So it's like moving the dial on the radio to a different station in your brain. So let's say you're somebody with a lot of anxiety, and let's say you're freaking out over all kinds of things. By changing your brainwave activity, it will force a reset of how you are placing your thought pattern because the brainwaves shift. Now, again, this is not new science, and binaural beats are awesome. They're not some new mystical Atlantean code thing that I see them advertised as. I mean, maybe they were. Who knows? Yet it's a science that has been around forever. As a matter of fact, the militaries, through the Geneva Convention, have banned brain wave altering weapons in war, in the rules of war in the Geneva Convention. And you all know I think those are idiotic. I think war is idiotic. But to have rules in war, it's okay if we kill each other, but we're going to kill each other fairly, people. Fair fighting. Super stupid. These rules of war, whatever. In the Geneva Convention, it talks about the fact that you cannot have brain wave altering mechanisms when you're fighting. Why? Well, if I had a way to shoot very agitated brainwave scrambling pulses at a military's opposing army, then those soldiers are going to turn on each other and shoot everybody up because their brains won't work right. Are you catching my drift here? Their brains won't work right. So let's loop this back around to the VLF array over in Fort Collins, Colorado, that is shooting out a very low pulse that's traveling through the earth. Why'd they put it in Fort Collins? Why? Well, it may interest you to note that you can't just plunk a VLF array anywhere. You have to have the right surface conditions. You have to have the right soil conditions. If the rocks are too hard or too soft or too watery or too weird, the sound won't travel. The frequency won't travel through the earth the way it needs to. It's got to have some ramp up. It's got to have some legs before the wave can actually surf its way to the ocean. So up in Fort Collins, the soil density was the right density, and plus it's between some bodies of water and some other stuff, which really works out well if you are a VLF array, okay? So one of the things that I think is fascinating here is, again, let's go back to the fact that both Boulder and Littleton, Colorado are up against the mountains. They thought about placing a VLF array in Boulder, but it was too close to the mountains. And guess what the mountains do? They refract the signal. They block the signal, just like a bay barrier out in the water, okay? A big wave would come and hit that concrete bay barrier and splash backwards into the open ocean. And on the other side, the water is calm. So the VLF array, if they were to place it in Boulder, would have splashed up against the mountains and would have gone nowhere except to feed back into Boulder because Boulder would catch the backsplash. That's why they didn't put the VLF array there. That's why they moved it up to Fort Collins. So what do we got here? Well, not only do we have a ley line that cuts right through both of these areas, that's very powerful, that transmits world, and by areas I'm talking about Littleton, Colorado, and Boulder. We have a huge ley line transmitting world consciousness, which is going through a massive shift right now. And we also have, gang, don't forget, a VLF array that's shooting underneath the ground. Now, some of that VLF array some of it is going to go underneath those mountains because it's got a ways to go. It's got a good ramp up. And some of it is going to splash against those mountains and come backwards, okay, so to speak. I'm trying to use as many visuals as I can. Now, when we're dealing with 60 hertz, even though that's a low frequency, it is considered a higher frequency in the brain that can be considered an agitant or an agitation. And when there were a lot of world governments, actually, especially Russia and Germany and, a lot of the authoritarian heavy hitters back in the day, that were experimenting with brainwave technology, thus the Geneva Convention saying, no, we cannot use this in war. This is not fair. And they were creating mechanisms to shoot at soldiers pulses that were 30 hertz and higher. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because if you agitate the brain with a hertz level or a pulse level of 30 hertz and higher at a pretty consistent rate, that will create agitation, paranoia, really like a beehive in somebody's head. So I wasn't kidding when I was talking about people being soldiers having brain wave entraining frequencies fired at the brains, which is an electromagnetic organ, and having that refract and create agitation in the prefrontal cortex, which would make people turn around and shoot each other. I was actually dead serious because that's what happens. So, when you think about people wearing tinfoil hats and whatnot, obviously tinfoil is not going to refract those types of energies. You'd have to wear a lead hat, which would be weird. So, and even then, that's a VLF array probably will travel right through that. It travels through dense stone and all kinds of stuff and goes way into the earth. So probably your little lead hat isn't going to save you either. So let's look at some people who might have some unstable mental processes to begin with, living in Boulder or living in a Columbine area, Littleton. And let's look at that backsplash coming off of the VLF arrays in addition to the consciousness issues running right up the middle of that ley line. It was drawn so poignantly to me through the angel who walks with the world, how our brains just melt, in essence, when we don't provide a proper, entrainment for them that's healthy. And when you look them up on the map, go ahead and put a pin in Columbine and put a pin in Boulder, Colorado, and go all the way up, and you can just put a piece of paper on a map and just follow it all the way up. You're going to see some major centers. You're going to see the Crow Indian Reservation. You're going to see Bighorn Canyon, which is a major electromagnetic vortex center. It's insane. It goes all the way up to Montana, and you hit that Montana vortices point, where obviously somebody back in the day realized that was a really good place to put some big megaliths in order to conduct electricity. And that's what those were originally. That's what dolmens were. They were the transformer in the alley delivering earth ley line energy to other places, like a boosting power station. Have you ever seen one of those? Geez, we have so many of them in Montana. In Montana, you've got a lot of wide open space where there's nobody. Nobody. But maybe a rattlesnake and an antelope. I'm completely not kidding. And you'll be driving through nothing but farmland or just nothing. And all of a sudden on the horizon, you see these huge metal towers with colossal, giant steel cables running across them. And they're the humongous power transmitters, the great big cables that go from big dams to other places. They're massive. And you're looking at that, and all of a sudden you're noticing there's 5 or 6 or 8 of them, and they're all converging in this Mad Max and the Thunderdome looking weird transformer center that's then busting it out into all these smaller lines of power that look like a spider web going out across the prairie. And you can feel the EMF man, from 200 yards, your teeth are just, your mouth is watering, your teeth are tingling. If you have any metal fillings in your mouth still, they're zinging you. I mean, so much EMF out there. It's ridiculous. And we put those high EMF centers away from human beings because why? Because people know that they're not good for health, people. When we're talking a 60 hertz cycle that the VLF array up in Fort Collins, Colorado is emitting, 60 hertz is also consistent with interrupting cell. It either interrupts a cell's replication and healing process or it speeds it up, depending on the person. It interrupts cellular reproduction. So it either turns into cancer or it hyper-youthifies a person. It just depends on that person's cellular breakdown, really. So when we're looking at all these shootings and we start to think about the violence in the United States, we can start to see that a lot of the violent centers and a lot of what's going on and a lot of the weirdness that's happening are sitting right off of ley lines. And especially when we look at the uptake of the Earth's population and the violence and the shootings and whatnot that have occurred. Again, going back to the ley line maps of the world and the more reputable ones, what you tend to see is that you see star patterns where these Earth energy grids cross over one another. And some of the biggest star patterns that we have that cross over each other in terms of big convergence points, I would say, electromagnetically on the planet. One of the biggest that we have is just right off the tip of Florida, right off the eastern tip of Florida. And we think of that as the Bermuda Triangle area. That thing has, it's got, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 energy points converging there. And when we have that many energy points on the planet, it tends to fold space-time. That's a lot of electromagnetic energy converging in one space, which will dimensionally fold things. It will turn particle matter in on itself. And that's where we get time slips and all kinds of other cool stuff. And again, if you're not a science person, I encourage you to be one. Because science is basically the cookbook for the entire universe. It's super cool. If I had more time in my day and in my life, I would absolutely engage getting my astrophysics degree. I think it'd be so fun. And I do work as a citizen scientist from home on SETI projects and anything I can really get my hands on because I just love it. It's so much fun. And I see so much of it in my work. As a person who's a, quote, psychic, which I am technically, I have a massive dimensional and EMF sensitivity. And that really just means that my brain picks up these space-time folds. It picks up different dimensions. It picks up different frequencies. It could be my brain that's doing all of that. I tend to think it's also a spiritual issue. Yet I think I come with some hardware, as we were talking about brain entrainment and picking things up, right? That just picks this stuff up. And I think all of our brains pick this stuff up. I really do, to all kinds of varying degrees, which I think is super fascinating. So if you get a chance to read about brain entrainment, you're going to read about some pretty awesome stuff. For those that may be kind of getting lost in some of this science, I want you to think about the recent strides in medicine that involve plant healing, okay? There's a lot of plant medicines like psilocybin and different types of what could be considered traditional hallucinogenics when taken in microdoses, then allow the brain to re-entrain itself, yet from a chemical perspective as opposed to a sound pulse or electromagnetic perspective. And what they found with the plant medicines, which I think is super, super fascinating. And in about 4 to 5 years, we're going to see this becoming more mainstream, just like we're seeing CBD products become mainstream now, is that the plant medicines, or what was once considered the tripping or hallucinogenic sect of chemicals in the brain, force a brain pattern out of its normal roadway. It's like all of a sudden, you're the way you think, gang, and the way I think, these are roads built by our brain, super highways of information sharing that were paved from childhood. And we start to pave these roads to make the travel between thoughts far faster and far more efficient. Okay, our brain literally is built to create chemicals to make roadways between major thought processes. Now, if I am someone who experienced a lot of trauma as a child, then the roadways built for me by my brain chemistry are going to lead me to a lot of thought processes which may be considered by some to be paranoid or negative, because these particular thought processes, these roadways, are built to keep me safe. So I may become hyper-vigilant as a young adult or an adult, constantly looking for potential threats, danger, or problems that don't exist in that current situation, because all of the chemicals that manufactured my go-to thought processes, like hide under the bed, somebody's going to beat you, or make sure you're out of the house when dad comes home, or whatever it is, they were created by the chemicals of distress. So you have a distress highway system in the head that's designed to keep you alive. That is literally the brain's primary function, is to keep you alive. Okay? So if you're a person, say, who has gone through a lot of trauma as a young person, all of your superhighways in your head are built around trauma and keeping yourself alive. And they all go by, a volcano blowing up and a pit of death and snakes. And it's all this very heavy, hypervigilant stuff. And we call the affect of this post-traumatic stress disorder. We call it many things, where our brain is constantly mapping to the worst case scenario. And it's doing that because we've built super highways through the worst case scenarios in an attempt to keep you alive. All right. So when we talk brain entrainment, we're talking about building new roads in your brain, which is super cool. And guess what? Your brain can keep building new roads until the day you die. Yes, it's true that we do start to lose a little of our brain elasticity as we get older. However, there's a ton of studies coming out about how our brains can last and last and last if we exercise, if we eat the right things. I highly recommend to everybody. You'll gag on it and you'll hate my guts for 5 minutes, but I highly recommend everybody start drinking celery juice. It's disgusting. It tastes like bitterness and unhappiness had a baby in hell. I mean, it's really gross. However, if you can choke it down, it is so amazing for you. It cleans out. They're showing that it helps clean out plaque in the brain. It helps with antioxidants that remove icky brain slowing mechanisms. It cleans out the organs. It does super many things. I could do a whole podcast on celery juice. Yet, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, clean your brain out, drink that celery juice. It's also super cellular rejuvenation, all kinds of stuff. Ladies, gentlemen, you want to look fabulous, drink a little celery juice. It's a little hate going down and a lot of love coming out. So there you go. So when we're talking about the brain and we're talking about building roadways, all right, roadways, we can retrain our road crew in our brain with sound and with chemicals. That's what microdosing under proper supervision through plant medicines can do for people. They are showing astounding results in people who have used plant medicines in recovery of deep traumas that has affected them in debilitating ways. And I personally know some phenomenal, amazing healers out there and readers and life coaches and psychics who have traversed the very rocky roads of their own brain roads that were really paved with trauma by instituting properly monitored plant medicines in microdoses, and it has helped them. And then they move on and their brains are out of the rut of building those trauma roads, and they can build all kinds of brand new roads that go to hope and excitement and joy and all kinds of things. So brain entrainment, our little brains, gang, are the ultimate platform for manifestation, if you think about it. Because it's an organ that's mostly water, filled with electricity, that wants to protect you. So it's trying to make pathways of least and fastest resistance so you can make decisions on the spot to keep you alive. And we can retrain those pathways with sound, with food, and with chemicals. So there's never any reason that I have to stay stuck in a rut. And some people don't believe this is true, or some people prefer to just, take antidepressants and to kind of dull down some of those super highways so they don't notice as many off ramps in their brain. And so they can stick to the main highways in the brain. That's fine. Yet if you are somebody who struggles with severe trauma, I would deeply point you in the direction of looking at a licensed and a reputable plant medicine therapist. And I say that because there's a lot of quackadoodles out there that want to just hand you a bowl of ayahuasca and tell you to, suck on the tail of your spirit animal and have fun. That'll be $5,000, please. So let's stay away from that, because unless you're somebody with a lot of brain cells to spare, something like ayahuasca is an intense plant medicine, and all plant medicines have plant devas that walk with them. And the plant devas kind of don't dig people just tripping to trip or to be cool or whatever. I mean, it's a misuse of their medicine, so they tend to be a little grumpy about it. And I know a lot of people who've gone and tripped on ayahuasca and had horrible nightmares for a long time after that about the jungle eating them and all these things. And I'm like, well, what were you expecting? I mean, you took this sacred thing and you went there to be cool and, then got a tattoo while you were high, and now you have to cover the tattoo up because you hate it. I mean, we do so many weird things thinking that we're going to liberate ourselves. And I'm not meaning to sound grumpy. I just, we're at a very interesting time frame in the feminine time frame where we're boiling down to a very short amount of time to really make some pivotal changes on the earth. And that's why I get a little more on point, and I probably sound a little judgier than I used to several years ago about certain modalities. I am not meaning to judge them. I am making an observation on their usefulness versus the consequences of misusing them. That is my observation. And so what I would tell you is when we're dealing with these ley lines on the earth, conveying consciousness, which is a real thing, when we're dealing with VLF arrays that are shooting 60 hertz through the ground, which is an agitation to a brainwave. And some of that is splashing back against those mountains and splashing back onto the communities. Not a lot, but there is some. If I'm someone in Boulder or I'm someone in the Columbine area in Littleton, and my brain is already in a squirreled out place, and I am somebody who is splicing together ideas that aren't healthy anyway, and I'm hit with a burp, the earth basically says, and out comes all of its emotionality and all of its energy with all of its people freaking out. And it cuts through my town. And there is a consciousness earthquake, let's put it to you that way, that rolls through the ground and rocks my noodle. And then I've got some backsplash coming off of the VLF array. That's rough. And my brain just might go sideways. And I might just decide there are demons in the school or demons in the parking lot or demons in the King's Super in Boulder. Who knows what I'm seeing, because my mainframe just went south. Okay? The human brain is fascinating. It's fascinating. So I believe if we really studied places of major battles, major conflicts, why certain castles are built in certain spots, we can begin to understand that we are living on a being that is alive, and we are sharing blood or energy, if you want to think about it like blood, through these ley line vein systems. And we can begin to look at areas of our country where there's a lot of violence. And I find it fascinating that oftentimes they come up on these ley line maps. Now, it's very, very important for me to point out here before you get online and start looking up ley lines. It's L-E-Y, by the way, not L-A-Y, not like lay on down. Ley lines are not something that are necessarily supported by geography. They're not necessarily supported by science. They're considered pseudoscience, kind of like psychic activity is considered a pseudoscience. Yet I will tell you they are real, okay? And just like ghosts weren't considered and still aren't considered real by science, they are real. Many people have seen them. We've talked about the physics of them. We talk about why they're there and how they're created, why sometimes ghosts are around more than other times. And a lot of it has to do with energy levels, vortexes, ley lines, electromagnetic refraction, space-time folds. I mean, the whole thing. So when we're talking about ley lines, you're going to get a lot of weird conflicting information online. That's why it's kind of easy for some people to put out some really weird stuff about ley line shapes and whatnot. One of the things I do find interesting is that my hometown of Billings, Montana, ends up being right smack in the middle of a million different ley line maps. And I have often told people that Billings, Montana, though it's not the sexiest city in Montana, really, it's got the best people. I'll tell you, God people are amazing here. Kind, awesome people. Yet it is a giant energy center up here. And it's huge. I mean, even being born in the hospital that I was born at, which was, I was born at St. Vincent's Hospital a million years ago in 1969. And that hospital sits right off of a street called North 27th Street. And that street is a dormant fault line that runs right up an area of sandstone cliffs called the Rim Rocks. Now, whenever you have a fault line, you have a lot of electromagnetic energy that leaks out of that area. So who knows how my noodle was formed when I was being born? Who knows what happened there with that electromagnetic coming out of the energy coming out of the ground? So it's just very fascinating to me, the whole thing and how our brains work. And so, again, just note that ley lines are not considered a, quote, hard science, except there's a lot of hard science to support them. I guess it's the best way to put that, just in all fairness and in transparency there. However, there's some really fascinating issues. Like if you look into the St. Michael's ley line over in Europe, it is a straight line of churches. A straight freaking line that's built all through, 1,600 miles or something like that. And they were built way before people had the ability to get up from the sky or do any sort of surveying to that degree to put those churches on an exact straight line. So human beings are feeling an energy that comes out of the earth, and they are putting structures on those particular points of energy. They're feeling mystical regions. They're building dolmens around vortexes and vortices. This is what we do as humans because our brains, again, as electromagnetic instruments, are built to actually pick this stuff up. Okay? So we have this opportunity to understand, wow, there's a lot going on with the human brain. And is it possible that there's just two unhappy people in Colorado that just maybe, I don't know, went a little crazy because of the long winters? Sure, that's absolutely true. But it's super weird that they're on a line that goes right up and crosses through a major energy center in Bighorn Canyon and goes right up and hits the Montana Dolmens. That's weird. Okay, that's weird. And if we look at how many VLF array signals cut across or under the mountains, not just from the Fort Collins area. I mean, it's not right in Fort Collins, this VLF array, it's in the area. Yet, if we look at other transmitters coming from Arizona, coming in from Oregon, from Washington, we have a lot of VLF relay lines that cross in that portion of Colorado. So, we keep hearing about this crazy stuff that happens there. Now, another sort of sidebar that I think is interesting is that many of us are familiar with the TV show South Park. And of course, that takes place in Colorado, and it's an actual place. And the creators of South Park made that cartoon because so many weird things happened in their area of Colorado. Weird things happened. And when I was in Boulder for the Ascension Tour, it's this floaty zone down there. I mean, the energy of Boulder is you just float there. It's a non-resistance zone. It's amazing. And you can create anything you want, but it may seem like you're going nowhere fast because like a vacuum in space, you're just floating around. And even though there's no resistance, it's kind of hard to figure out how to move forward until you figure out that there's no resistance. And then it becomes a thing. So going back to South Park, when I was reading about the creators and why they made everything so weird there, they literally said, you have no idea, the weirdest stuff happens down here. And when I looked up that area, again, Colorado, you're looking at a lot of weird ley line stuff and a lot of VLF pathway stuff. And then you got to think about the human brain and how that interacts with that. Now, am I saying that everybody who lives in Colorado is going to go crazy? Well, obviously not. It's a beautiful state. I've got family down there. It's a beautiful place. Yet we do need to take into consideration that the human brain and how it works is a major factor in not only managing mental health issues, yet people who have these huge electromagnetic sensitivities and they don't even know it. You know, when we see a lot of these young men, white males who are snapping and shooting up things, we look at the lack of support that we give a lot of our white males for dealing with emotional health issues or, gee, I could be emotionally weak issues. There's a lot of other matriarchal cultures out there, the African American culture, Italians, my God, the Latin culture, that give their males a little bit more room to be human. And I'm sure that there's males in all of those cultures that would argue that point. Yet there's this weird, gross thing in white male culture that I've noticed a lot of guys have really struggled to overcome, that are some pretty negative messages, just like women all over the place have overcome negative messaging. And it's really about not being able to deal with emotionality. So we see a lot of white men snapping, grabbing a gun and killing something because that's how they think they get command over that powerless feeling or that beehive in their head. And sadly, that doesn't help anything. You just go to jail and you still have a beehive in your head. So that really is awful. So as we look at these things, I encourage you to have some fun looking at ley lines. And again, take into consideration some of the maps are a little wonky, but you'll feel the ones that are real because ley lines and where they are and how we are attracted to them is indigenous to every single living thing on this planet. We're attracted to power centers. We really are. Yeah, I was fascinated by the idea of propagated history. In other words, if you go to certain places in the United States, there's certain pieces of very dysfunctional history that continue to play themselves out. For instance, exaggerated racism in the South. And if you go to the American South and you look at the ley line system there are some big ley lines that are cutting right off of Florida that create an electromagnetic net, is the best way I'd put it to you. And I would imagine that it's holding all that energy to the ground. And when I went back to, well, I've never been to the Deep South. I take that back. I went to Missouri with my wife. My wife is from St. Louis, and we went back to visit some family. And I did some podcasts while road tripping with her, actually across the country. And it was just such a weird experience to go through a place like Kansas where there is not a lot of water energy moving the energy, so it's all the air. The ground is just this static like an ocean bottom, and the air moves all the energy. It was weird. It was wild. All of you folks living in the Midwest, man, you are hardcore. That is intense out there. I love it. So when we're dealing with the American South and we're dealing with the net of vortices or vortexes that are there, it does create a bit of a magnet. And if you think about a haunting, there's many different kinds of hauntings. There's an active haunting. There is a residual haunting. Residual hauntings are when a place has a particular set of elements that act as a transmitter and a projector. Like think of R2-D2 projecting out Princess Leia, help me, Obi-Wan. You're my only hope, over and over and over again. Obviously, Princess Leia was not actually there. She was a hologram that was trapped inside of the circuitry of R2-D2, and when that circuitry was triggered a certain way, she would play over and over again, doing the same exact thing. That's a residual haunting. And residual hauntings are created by electromagnetic elements. They're created by electromagnetic energy being transferred through oftentimes granite, crystalline content, iron content, silver content, gold content in granite, through limestone, which is made of compressed crystalline content. We see a lot of residual hauntings in castles. A lot of those castles are made of limestone. There's a lot of haunted elements in Bighorn Canyon. That whole canyon is limestone, filled with water. So when you have residual hauntings, it's where an energy will replay itself over and over again. Why am I talking about this? Well, in the American South, we have a lot of limestone caverns. We have a lot of low water tables in places like Louisiana. We have a lot of very wet, marshy areas. Plus, we've got these big ley lines projecting over everything and connecting these energy centers. So there's a lot of history and a lot of time folding in the American South. And when I was back in Missouri, I could feel this on the Mason-Dixon line. I could feel this fold over right being on the Great Missouri River, which is carrying a ton of electromagnetic and kinetic energy all the way down to the Gulf. So, I could feel it clear up on the Mason-Dixon. So I am sure if we get down into the deeper American South, there's a lot of that. I, of course, am not excusing cultural influence or racism on vortexes or on ley lines. I'm simply saying that everything adds to everything in the recipe book of life. And where we notice these repeat behaviors, we notice a lot of energy that holds those projections of history to the ground. And I would imagine that would be hard to get out of that or get past that if you're in these constant Princess Leias projecting themselves out of the plantation eras and whatever. I think that would be weird and rough. And I think there are ways we can offset that in the American South, yet we have to actually acknowledge it to be able to offset it, to be able to bring it in as perhaps just the tiniest piece of what's continuing to foster this culture of racism in certain parts of the country. And again, not blaming it all on vortexes or ley lines, you guys, so just hear that. However, it's interesting. It's very interesting scientifically to me why things happen in the United States, where they happen, why they happen in the United States over in Sedona, which is a massive vortex area. So I wanted to be able to cut this podcast in line here just to bring to you some very timely information about these shootings in Colorado, not to suggest everybody in Colorado is going to continue to be shot up. And of course, this horrible, horrible tragedies that continue to happen as we have technologies that launch and continue to agitate the prefrontal cortex of the brain. It's going to be really important, gang. Make sure you're getting out to nature. Make sure you're getting into water. Make sure that you're allowing yourself non-screen time where you're not around your devices that transmit and receive. Please make sure when you're sleeping, you put your phone in airplane mode. I understand a lot of us use our phones as an alarm clock. I do. I put my phone in airplane mode and I make sure it's at least 5 or 6 feet away from my head. I don't need that electromagnetic energy by my head when I sleep. It's very difficult. So I would just tell you to make sure that you are being mindful of your noodle and your noggin and have some fun looking up your ley lines and energy centers. And remember, sometimes vortexes and ley lines aren't on any maps. They haven't been mapped yet. And you can feel them in the body. They oftentimes feel like your hair standing on edge or pressure in your sinuses, or sometimes they make you sick to your stomach. Sometimes they can make your mouth water. They can make your teeth feel funny and ringy or lightheaded. You can feel waves come up through your body. Seismic waves will oftentimes represent themselves through ley lines. Ley lines are oftentimes created by a seismic wave or seismic pressure. So there's ways that your body can become this incredible ley line detector, which I personally love. My wife and I have a joke. I will walk through something and I'll feel it in my sinuses, my third eye, my head, my teeth. She gets this nausea and this big wave up through her. I can get nauseated depending on the type of energy in a space. Usually that's a really low grade, nasty conscious energy, like that dark, chaotic energy we like to call demonic energy, or the chaotic energies that can be formerly human people with a bad attitude stuck in an ethereal vortex. That's where it comes through the low energy for me. But everybody feels it differently. So get a chance to just monitor your body. And we can do a fun podcast on that too. How do you feel energies and earth energies through your body? So gang, I just wanted to cover this. Let us send our highest thoughts of peace and wellness to all of the families who lost loved ones in this recent shooting and in any shooting. Even if you read this in the newspaper or you read it on your phone and it gives you just this horrible feeling, no matter what it is, no matter what world tragedy it is, if you just take a minute and just put your hand on your chest, just put your hand over your heart chakra and just send peace to these people or to the situations. It can be a one sentencer in your head. Please send peace. I send peace to the people who are suffering through this. The quantum field, the God energy will take that peace right to the people that are intended to receive it and to the area that are intended to receive it. Because as we have discussed, we are full of electromagnetic superhighways on the earth called ley lines. And that energy not only travels through the earth, but it travels through the quantum field. And I know there's a lot of bad rap on thoughts and prayers, and I'm certainly not trying to be trite. Thoughts and prayers, and thoughts and prayers. I am simply saying if we really want to take advantage of the ley line superhighway to heal the earth, put your hand on your heart when you read these tragic things, or just every day, and send love, as much love as you can feel in your chest, and a hug. Imagine hugging someone who's hurting in that area, and let it go out into the ethers. And that energy will receive its proper intended recipient and be delivered. And that's one way that we can help heal the world, gang. It's one way we can help heal the world. Thanks for sticking with me through the giant science project called today's podcast. I love you all, and I will see you next podcast.